Yes, o diba? The world bigat.
Ako din, si
Mas.
Ako si Edge,
And I am Cristel.
and welcome sa podcast kung saan matatanong mo sa sarili mo na
Nakakaramdam pa pala ako? Welcome back to another episode of Aba Nakakaramdam pa pala ako podcast. This is Tel.
Hi guys, this is Edge. Kamusta kayong lahat? So, ito na naman tayo sa panibagong episode. Babe, kamusta ka? How's your day?
I don't know kung okay pa ako. Pero I'm super happy. I'm
Oh my
good. I'm
gosh.
good actually. Super excited for this
Mm-mm.
episode kasi like we've mentioned sa first two episodes natin, super enjoy ako for the first two
Mm-mm.
episodes with Story Swipe Right and Huntahan Nights, diba?
Yes.
Ikaw, how are you?
Oo, totoo. Okay naman ito, kung makikita mo sa background kung may pa-Game of Thrones ako dito and everything. May pa-Game of Thrones ako at syempre damang-dama kung ako si Daenerys Targaryen. Though hindi ako nanonood ng Game of Thrones, siya lang kilala ko talagang ano. Oh my God, ang OA ko lang.
Sobrang
Pero
ganda
sa
mo
lahat ng
dyan.
listeners natin na fan ng Game of Thrones, di ba nga, hello, like, huwag kayo ma-offend, hindi talaga ako nanonood ng Game of Thrones, hindi ako fan, but yun nga, sabi nila maganda daw. So siguro pag may time, bibigyan ko ng yung self ko ng time to watch some episodes. Malay mo naman magustuhan ko, di ba? Pero Tel, balita ko may kasama ulit tayo today.
Yes, super excited with this episode like I've mentioned nga a while ago. And now, since nandyan naman na siya, let us introduce her na, di ba? Yeah, I'll just read the brief background about her. Our episode guest for today is Micah Gonzalez. She is a content creator and an online coach who helps fellow creators and creative entrepreneurs to design their days with more purpose, impact, and creativity. O, diba? Powerful.
Oo, bakla, big
She is,
time.
diba?
Let's
She is,
welcome Micah Gonzalez. Oh my
yes,
gosh.
welcome to the show, Micah.
Nakakaloka.
Hello, Edge. Hello, Tel. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh my God. First time ko magkaroon ng guest na spoken dollar, girl. Like, oh my God.
Oh my gosh.
Parang feeling ko
No,
si
I'm
Ilong ko na
Filipino.
makikinig.
Don't worry. I'm Filipino. I can Tagalog.
Na-stress ang bahagya si Micah. Very
Oh my
light
gosh,
lang,
no.
girl. Okay, we'll try
Pipilitan.
our best to speak in English as well. This is for our listeners as well, like international listeners. We added a specific
Thank you for your
episode that has,
consideration.
like,
Thank you.
English
Diba?
only. It's really just a big
Mapipilitan
challenge for us
mag-Tagalog
because,
si
it's
Micah.
really not our first language. English is really not our first
Yeah, no
language. But
worries.
we'll try our
Same with
best.
me. Yeah. No, same with me. Like Tagalog's not my first language. I didn't grow up sa Luzon, so it's not my first Filipino
Oh,
language
I see.
even. I grew up in Bacolod City. So we speak, Hiligaynon or Ilonggo, whatever. So
Yeah.
Tagalog is a little,
Yeah.
it's not my first language. Pero I studied in Manila,
Yes.
so don't
People
worry.
from
Don't worry. If
Visayas
you
talaga are
Tagalog
English
the crap out of me,
people.
I'll understand.
Oh my gosh,
We're
thank
fine.
God for this opportunity. Oh my gosh, I can finally breathe, like freely breathe.
Kanina
Oh
ka
my
pa ba
gosh.
kinakabahan?
So, by the way, we wanna. Oh, I'm really nervous. Like, I don't know why. Maybe it's because Miss Micah right here is really, like, giving a lot of insights to people as well. But before we go to our topic for today, Beb, ano yung pag-uusapan pala natin ngayon?
This is actually different from the first two episodes that we have discussed with yung dalawa nating na-guest, diba?
Yes.
This is a little different but somehow connected to one of our discussion last year, which is self-doubt.
Okay. So what is it all about?
The episode for today is entitled Imposter Syndrome. So we will be discussing more of that
Oh, okay.
together with Micah, and alamin natin like what are the characteristics kaya of having this kind of syndrome, and paano natin siya maiiwasan, di ba?
Mm. Okay, I see. Thank you so much. Nakakaloka naman pala itong imposter syndrome. When I first heard of imposter syndrome, ang talagang pumasok sa isip ko is that yung parang you're concealing your personality kasi from the word itself, imposter. 'Di ba? Parang you're creating another person or like alter ego. Parang gano'n kasi yung nasa isip ko. But when I researched about it, it's totally a different meaning pala. So we need to actually know more about imposter syndrome because I can totally see that a lot of people can relate to this specific topic that we have for today. Now, for the first part of our conversation, we wanted to ask Micah about what is imposter syndrome? What I actually learned about this is that the first two people who initiated the study for this one is Drs. Pauline Rose Plans and Miss Dr. Suzanne Imes, if I'm not mistaken. Micah, we wanted to know more about the imposter syndrome and how it could affect people as well.
Sure. Let me just, I think the best way for me to explain what imposter syndrome is maybe by painting a little picture, a little story that maybe a lot of us can
Mm,
relate to, even in one way or another. So let's say, bagong fresh grad ka, you just got out of college, you're so excited to find a job.
right.
And let's say, okay, you did this whole thing, you go through the application process, what we all have to do. And then let's say your dream company appeared in your inbox and they said, "Hey, we want you to apply for our position or we're
Oh my
offering
God.
you this position." And imposter syndrome is like
Mm.
that little feeling in it's that little voice in your head that's telling you, di mo yan deserve, or whoa, you
Oh,
can't
I
do that
see.
job, or oh my gosh, you don't know anything, how dare you can't possibly work for your dream company kaagad. um and that's essentially what it is in so many ways, in
Right.
so many instances of our life. It's when we feel like we don't deserve whatever it is that we want, or we don't deserve to do something just
Mm-hmm.
because we feel like we're imposters. We feel like, oh my god, like for example, you guys were on Joy Springs podcast. I wouldn't, I'm not sure about you. I can
Yeah.
only speak for myself. But when I was invited, I was like, the first thought in my brain was, who are you to go on this podcast? Who are you?
Yeah.
What do you
We
have?
felt
Same
this
feeling,
way
girl.
actually. Same feeling.
Exactly. See, I'm a mind reader. No, it's just no. The reason I know this is because it's a very common thing. You don't have to be a podcaster. You don't have to be a content creator. You don't have to be a creative. You feel it anytime in your life. So that's really what it
Yes.
is. It's feeling like, oh man, you don't deserve to do this, to do that, or to get this, to get that. Kasi baka it comes from like low self-esteem, low self-confidence, which is very, very,
Right.
very common. A lot of us think, a lot of us actually, the dangerous part ng imposter syndrome is we think na it's true. We think that whatever it's saying is true. Like, oh, you don't deserve to be on Joy Springs podcast kasi wala kayong, I don't know, you haven't said anything of note. Parang ganon. It's like, it's kind of,
Mm.
it feels like it's a fear that feels like a true thing when if when you look at it naman from another angle, it's actually not. So yeah, I don't know if you guys have
Okay.
more examples of imposter syndrome, because like my example was so specific to us who went on
Yes.
a Joy Spring episode. But like maybe you guys, like something in you when you were looking for a job, or maybe when you started this
Yeah.
podcast, mga ganon. I'm sure you guys can think of so many instances,
Definitely.
diba?
Oo naman. Oo. I can actually relate to that. And earlier, before we started our podcast, I actually researched about imposter syndrome, and I come across with this video from TED Talk on YouTube. I remember Mr. Mike Cannonbrook mentioned that how he defined imposter syndrome is not about being afraid, or not actually pushing back the feedbacks about the people, because they're actually giving you some commendations and everything because they feel like you're capable of doing things. He actually defined it as more of like fear of accepting the challenge. That's how he defined it in one of his talks. And I find imposter syndrome as actually like there's actually big four characteristics or four what do you call this, symptoms that we can actually, you know, talk about more of later on. So parang yun yung nagiging big deal sa karamihan na siguro hindi nila alam, they're not aware that they're actually going through this specific syndrome because like what I said a while ago, this is actually the type of topic that a lot of people don't talk about because they feel like it's normal. It's normal to feel that you're having doubts on yourself, that you can't do specific tasks, wherein you're actually on that situation already. So say for example, tayo like both of us, 'di ba? Parang we get the chance to be invited in Joy Spring show. I mean, in her podcast, but there's actually a feeling inside that maybe we're not deserving being, to be a guest on her show kasi nga magagaling yung mga speakers na
Right.
nafe-feature. And it's something that parang nakakatakot. I mean, you're afraid of um, constructive criticism because part of symptoms of imposter syndrome is perfectionism. You want everything to be perfect. You want to fall in place just how the way you planned it. And it's really hard kasi parang, alam mo yun, nakakatakot lang din na minsan gawa ka ng mistakes and everything. But I think that's imposter syndrome for me. How about you, Tel? There's
Like
something
you
to add?
like you did a while ago, I also did my research, and it says here na parang some of the
Mm-hmm.
characteristics kasi is in line with self-doubt, like what you guys mentioned nga a while ago. Kaso parang
Mm-hmm.
medyo questionable pa din siya sa akin. Like I wanna ask Micah lang, how
Mm-hmm.
is it different with self-doubt? How is imposter syndrome different with self-doubt?
That's a actually really good question. Now, I'm not gonna say I'm a psychologist or sociologist or anything.
Right.
So I mean, I'm not approaching this from like a very scientific thing. But how I would differentiate
Uh-huh.
self-doubt from imposter syndrome is when imposter syndrome is like a repetition of self-doubt so much that we internalize things about ourselves that might not be true because we're afraid of I
Right.
like that Edge watch that TED talk about imposter syndrome, how it's about we refuse to accept challenges. It's actually like that. That is a result of constant self-doubt when we doubt ourselves so much so often that we begin to believe I'm only meant for this. Like, oh no, I don't deserve this award. I don't deserve this job. I don't deserve this client. Blah blah blah. Because we keep repeating these self doubting things to
Right.
ourselves, and the difference is very actually sometimes you don't even know what you're experiencing is imposter syndrome. Because for you, baka it's just regular. It's a fact about me. Like, oh, me not being ready for this
Yeah.
job, for this client, for this project, for this whatever. That's a fact about me. And that's actually I think when it crosses from just plain self-doubt, which everyone experiences by the way, kahit sino ka man, we will experience it. We will always
Yeah.
say, "Oh my god, baka this is way too much for me." That's when it crosses from that to actual imposter syndrome where it becomes where I
Mm-hmm.
think another thing about imposter syndrome that differentiates it from self-doubt is it actually affects our actions. So like self-sabotaging is one example. Can you imagine if, example, you guys were invited to Joy Springs podcast? What is an example of your imposter syndrome
Yeah.
taking over and actually affecting your life? It could have been maybe you pulled out from the guesting. You're like, oh my gosh, guys, Joyce, wala kaming masasabi. Sorry, we'll pull out, or next year na lang or something. That's one example. We self-sabotage without knowing that it's self-sabotage. We self-reject. We say, no one's gonna want to
Yeah.
read my book. No one's gonna want to hire that company won't want to hire me. I think that's when it becomes imposter syndrome. And it's hard naman to tell that you're experiencing it unless you're really self-aware. And actually even the most self-aware people, we struggle with even saying like, oh my god, I'm going through that thing right now. This is my thought process right now. It's very bad. It's very hard to catch yourself in the
Yeah.
moment. Pero I mean, it's not impossible naman. Like especially especially now, especially if the listeners now, if this is your first time to hear about imposter syndrome, now that you know that these are the signs, this is what can happen. Maybe you can think back in your own life, diba? Like, have I ever self-sabotaged? Have I ever self-rejected? Do I have like such a bad perception of myself? Ganon, diba? So at least now, like I really admire you guys, Edge and
Yeah.
Crystal. I know you guys. You guys were telling me before we recorded that you guys were so
Oo.
afraid of talking about this because you didn't know anything about it. That's actually for me. That's a really good thing because people need to know about things that maybe you
Yeah.
and I don't know about, and that's actually a good way. Actually, that's not to preempt naman, but like that's actually one of the best ways to beat imposter syndrome when you listen to the experiences of other people,
Yes.
when you talk about uncomfortable things. Those are really
Yeah.
helpful, actually. Yeah.
Right.
Wow,
Masasabi na
that's
lang
really
nila, yun
cool.
pala yun. That's another term
Yeah.
pala
Oo.
for self-doubt.
Yes. Actually, totoo nga yan. Kasi, I still remember kanina habang nanonood ako ng mga videos dun sa TED Talks, Lou Solomon actually mentioned that she has this, mindset dun sa mga symptoms. She call it the Fantastic Four. So, andun si anxiety, andun nga si perfectionism, si self-doubt, at saka yung fear of rejection. Yun yung
Rejection.
description niya dun sa symptoms na yun. So, based on that question, how we differentiate self-doubt from imposter syndrome, ano kasi siya parang umbrella siya, di ba? So,
Yeah.
si self-doubt is one of the ingredients of imposter syndrome. If you possess
True.
that kind of symptoms, then maybe positive yan na meron kang imposter syndrome. And a lot of people do self-doubt. Hindi lang, at saka kasi sabi rin dun sa napanood kong video, imposter syndrome tends to appear to those people who is achiever. Yung talagang mga successful people like Maya Angelou, Albert Einstein, those are the people that possess this kind of syndrome. And sinabi rin dun sa video na meron tayong tinatawag na um, what do you call this? Plural ignorance, pluralistic ignorance that applies to everyone. It's actually also imposter syndrome, but it actually applies to also like less performer people, if I can say that, if that's a safe word. Yung mga hindi ganun nag-excel or yung mga tipong taong normal people lang, hindi naman talaga achiever at all. If you feel self-doubt, if you're stop yourself doing something that can make you grow, that can help you, learn more, yung mga ganong bagay, meron ka ng imposter syndrome. And I think it's also important to talk about imposter syndrome because what I learned about imposter syndrome is that a lot of people is really not aware of it
Yes.
to the fact na akala nila normal. Tapos kapag nakakausap sila ng ibang tao who actually happens to experience that kind of situation, then they will finally realize that, hey, it's actually a serious matter that needs to talk about.
So
And we
true.
need to actually overcome it. Diba? And there's actually no way para sabihin natin na, alam mo yung imposter syndrome, we can get rid of it kasi it applies to everyone at talagang nangyayari siya in the daily basis. It's more of like siguro sabihin na lang natin, making it less. Kasi
Yes.
talagang hindi natin maiiwasan sa buhay na magsa-self-doubt talaga tayo eh. So, let's help each other. Maybe if you're a listener right now and you tend to understand that, oh my God, meron pala akong imposter syndrome. I suggest to maybe attend some counseling or maybe find a forum or community who talks about imposter syndrome. That way, yung tipo ng anxiety mo, yung mga anxiety mo, yung self-doubts mo, yung ganyan, malilesen siya. At least you will find someone who can understand your situation. You're not alone. Kasi yun yung sabi sa video na napanood ko na you feel like you're alone. You feel like ikaw lang yung may ganong situation. And that's imposter syndrome eh. But that's not true kasi sobra siyang widespread like around the world kahit anong occupation mo, anong level at antas ng pamumuhay mo, pwede ka magkaroon ng imposter syndrome. Nakakaloka lang yung imposter syndrome. You might
Grabe,
wanna
no?
add something, Tel.
Oh, very good points actually, because this will lead us to the next question that I have, Sana. I just want to ask Sana, who are the
Mm-mm.
people who most likely to have this syndrome? But you already mentioned, wala siyang pinipiling tao. Pero I'd like to ask lang din sana to you guys, like I know na hindi naman tayo psychologist or whatever, and this basically yung mga sinasabi natin is from what we
Right.
have read and what we have learned from um online or whatever. I just wanna ask, like, how does it affect a person? Is it a good thing ba to have this syndrome, or does it affect so much from a people? Because, syempre, like, if you have this syndrome, it affects you somehow. I know. For me, for sure. Kasi I had this eh. I didn't realize na I have it pala, not until I researched more about it. How does it affect
Mm.
someone? Like, I want to know your thoughts, guys. How do you think it affects someone?
Well,
Let's go with
that's
Micah
a
first.
very loaded question. But well, we kind of talked about a few of these effects, right? Like it becomes a way for us to, self sabotage or self reject. But I think over time,
Yeah.
when we constantly do that, that can be very dangerous for our mental health overall. Because
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many things, matters of the mind about that are kind of considered taboo in the Philippines. Like mental health is only starting
Yeah.
to become accepted, but and only mostly from our generation and younger. But like older generations, I know
Yes.
we've been fed by these toxic beliefs na walang depression yan, walang anxiety yan, ano lang yan, you know what I mean, sa ulo mo lang yan or whatever. And that's actually a for me, like Tel, you asked what the effects are. I think it doesn't just affect a person. I think it can affect an entire generation. It can affect an entire, country or whatever. Because
Yes.
if so many of us ignore that imposter syndrome is a thing, so how do we, how can we encourage young minds to do better, to want to achieve more? How can we stop people from thinking, oh my god, I can't possibly be like this or like that kasi maybe Filipino ako, or I grew up poor, or I don't have the money of my rich classmates kasi scholar lang ako sa university, something like that. um and if we refuse to talk about it, and if we refuse to acknowledge that maybe, actually not maybe, that most probably we've experienced this many times in our life, we might be holding ourselves back. And again, just loops back to the whole mental health thing. When we constantly, I believe, when we self sabotage all the time, that can really lead to serious some serious things in our mental health that we might really need some help for. And that's okay if you need it, honestly. Like if you had an
Yeah.
entire you lived your entire life maybe feeling imposter syndrome, and you think you need help, or you don't have a support system within you right now, like your friends, your family, they don't understand or whatever, then you need to give yourself the permission to seek help somewhere else. It doesn't even have to be if you can't afford therapy, you can't afford counseling. There are so many like free support groups, like what Edge said, like people who, if they don't talk about imposter syndrome, maybe talk they talk about mental health. They talk about how
Yeah.
to cope with these things. Those are very important things. That's why I love being in the age of the internet, kasi diba, we can find so
Yeah.
many free groups, resources, ganon, and that actually
Yes.
helps. Many people diba think na it won't help them, like so if I just follow an Instagram account that talks about mental health, makakure yung mental health ko. Obviously not. But what that does is it just elevates our it elevates our mindset. It helps us acknowledge that there are things that we're not aware of. There are things that we might be experiencing that needs real help, that needs real, that we need to acknowledge in ourselves. So that's actually one thing
Yeah.
that's very important, and why I'll always have conversations like this. We don't have to be psychologists or whatever to, and actually it's not really a real mental health disorder anyway. So if
Yeah.
it's something you experience, it's not something that you need to see a counselor to say, oh yeah, you have imposter syndrome. It's not like depression, it's not like anxiety where you need like a formal diagnosis. It's a syndrome, because syndromes are things that we experience. It's not necessarily meaning a mental health
Yeah.
issue. But again, I do want to bring these things up because I think they can lead to mental health issues if left
Yeah.
unacknowledged. So yeah.
Yes. Oh my God, that's really impactful and that's a lot. I mean,
Yes.
God. I think parang masabi na lahat ni Micah yung ano eh. Siguro kung may dadagdag na ako tell is that I think imposter syndrome can somehow give us parang second thoughts before we make actions. I think that's one of the good things about it. Kasi if we actually always look at the negative side of imposter syndrome, yes, it could actually lead to mental issues, mental health, and also all sorts of serious things. But I remember Mike from TED Talk. Parang binigyan niya ng example yung mga taong nagdadaan sa imposter syndrome na you can actually use imposter syndrome to its ability to make, parang to turn tables, parang maging positive eh. Parang ganon. So, siguro ang gawin na lang natin is that make imposter syndrome at least your best friend in a way na you have to think twice before you put actions in everything. Kasi parang yun yung imposter syndrome kasi is more of like validation to yourself eh. If you're doing good or not. Parang ganun kasi si imposter syndrome. Siguro instead of looking to the things na ay hindi ko to kayang gawin, why not ask yourself, bakit ibang tao dyan outside? Alam mo yon, they can do things pero ikaw yung nandun sa ganong situation. Yun yung gawin nating motivation lagi. Siguro doon lang tayo mag-rely. Make it as a motivation instead na parang you can do better, so much better than the rest of the people na nandun sa room na yun. Kasi you weren't be on that situation if you're not capable of, di ba? So, yun lang siguro yung maidadagdag ko. Kasi parang feeling ko talaga nasabi na ni Micah kanina lahat. Oh my gosh, nakakaloka. Oh my gosh.
No,
Yun lang,
actually that's
Bev. Ikaw ba?
actually a
May gusto
really
kang idagdag?
good suggestion. No, Edge, that's
Yes.
really great. The what you said, I like what you said about, instead of asking yourself this, instead of doing this, ask yourself this question. And that's actually one very effective way to deal with imposter syndrome, which is it's an exercise called reframing. That's the English. I don't know kung may Tagalog or whatever, but
Yeah.
basically it's just looking at something from a different angle. My favorite thing when I have imposter syndrome, when I'm feeling it, maybe I'm about to do something big, diba? I like to ask myself, Micah, who told you na you don't deserve this? Micah, who told you na you're not a good ganito, you're not a good ganyan? Who told you that? And then the second thing I like to ask is, what if the imposter syndrome is wrong? What if okay, so right now it's telling me, for example, oh, you don't deserve to do this, you
Yeah.
don't deserve to get that. But what if it's wrong? What if I do? Diba? Like it's so powerful, diba, to just ask yourself the right questions.
Right.
When imposter syndrome is telling you ganito, ganyan, try to challenge it. Try to challenge your own brain and say, is that really true? So I think that's a great point
Yeah.
for you to bring up, Edge, because it's super powerful. I can't possibly like say enough good things about mindset work like that.
Yes, I'd like to add lang kasi
Yeah.
napakinggan ko yung episode niyo with Joyce. So in addition to what Micah said, siguro if you feel
Yeah.
na nasa ganun kang moment na bakit or nagsa-self-doubt ka na kaya ko ba to or whatever, I think pwede natin i-relay dito yung sinabi ni Micah dun sa episode na why don't you try to do that thing or parang try mong gawin siya, upuan mo like sa work. Tinatamad ka na dun sa work mo na yun, ayaw mo na, bakit hindi ka magstay doon? Try
Yeah, the
doon
10
go back to work for
minute
10 minutes.
rule. Yeah, I remember
Diba?
that.
Diba? I learned na. May natutunan.
Yeah, the 10-minute
Parang
rule.
upuan mo yung bagay na yun for
Yeah.
10 minutes and see
Yeah.
what will happen.
Effective kasi if you parang yun nga sabi ni Micah dun sa episode niya with Joyce, if you reserve at least 10 minutes trying to do something, parang kasi 'di ba parang hindi ko to feel gawin eh. Like I don't like it eh. But if you have like at least maglaan ng 10 minutes just to try doing things, malay mo naman 'di ba mag-work. So, yun, bongga dun si Micah. Bet ko yung sinabi niya dun. Like, I like it so much.
Super.
Thank you for
super.
listening. That means a lot.
Diba? And I might wanna do it the
Oh
next
my
time kasi
goodness. Yes, di ba?
Diba?
Nakakaloka.
sobrang
Oh my
relate,
gosh.
especially when
I think
reading a new
before we
book,
wrap this
diba?
up, yes, definitely. Pero before we wrap this up, guys, gusto ko lang itanong baka meron kayong pasalamatan or idagdag or ihabol na anything before natin tapusin tong specific episode na to kasi ang dami natin natutunan ng sobra. Lalo na kay Micah. Miss Micah, you wanted to thank someone maybe or add something before we wrap this up?
Well, I actually want to thank you guys, Christelle and Edge, because thank you for being
Ah.
brave enough to have conversations like this. Even if there's imposter syndrome, you feel like you're not qualified to talk about it, blah blah blah. You still did the brave thing anyway. And honestly, one of the best cures for imposter syndrome is just doing small everyday acts of bravery, of courage, diba? Like
Yeah.
I think that's just the final thing. And I want to thank you guys for being open to having this conversation with me. Thank you for bringing such great energy. It means a lot. So thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you
I know
so
you have
much
a
to
vlog. You might want to plug it in. Your socials too.
Oh, sure.
Micah?
If anyone wants, more mindset stuff like this, stuff I talk about that's related to this, you can visit my blog. It's mindofmicah.com. So that's mind of MICA. That's how you spell Micah. It's spelled wrong a lot, but that's how you spell it. .com. Or you can listen to some of my videos on YouTube. I'm Micah Gonzalez. That's MICA, Gonzalez with a Z, that productivity girl on YouTube. I have many mindset videos just like this one. So, yeah. Cool.
Thank you so much. Beb, ikaw, may gusto kang pasalamatan?
I just wanna thank Micah lang kasi nung nag-message ako sa kanya, nag-reply din siya right away. So, yon. Super excited because a lot of the, yung first, ilan ba yung mga ni Joyce na invite? All of them are actually gonna be our guests too in the next few days. So I'm super excited
Episodes,
that Micah
yes.
was the first one to be your guest. Thank you for being on the show, Micah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. At para maging updated kayo sa lahat ng aming ganap, follow us on our social media accounts. We have our official Facebook page, that's Saba Nakakaramdam Papalako. On Twitter, that's Saba Nakakaramdam Papalako. And on Instagram, that's Saba Nakakaramdam Papalako _ At isa na naman po magandang topic ang natapos natin for today. Thank you so much sa walang sawang pagsuporta aming mga listeners. Again, this is Edge.
This is Christelle. Thank you again for listening. Bye.
Bye-bye!